We're glad to have you on.
And
Yeah.
last time we had you on the show, it was at our live event and we had only a short time to speak with you. So I'm excited to be able to expand on what we initiated in that first interview. You have an interesting journey that brought you to this work and functional movement beginning early on. What do you see now as the driving factors that cause you to choose this line of interest and become so passionate about the work you're doing?
I think so. Working with clients, I've been professionally working with clients to help them achieve their fitness, wellness goals for 16 years. And in that time frame, things have evolved. And one of the primary evolutions that I see is that people's thoughts and feelings and emotions and all that, from my perception, is all bound up in the way that they move and postural patterns, and the issues are in the tissues. And so that's become, over the years, it's become more and more interesting to me, just observing that connection and seeing if I can help people from more of like a physical perspective. And I know that within that there will be mental, emotional, psychological connection. So it's become more beautiful with time, I guess.
Yeah.
I love that the way that you can basically read a person's body just by looking at them, or if they're, maybe if they're walking or you see them in movement, you can really get an idea of who they are as a person. You're kind of like a psychic or an intuit in some way. And, we have our local psychic on the show is Jade. So I love the fact that you have found a way to become so intuitive through movement, and that you've given us a guidebook literally to figure out how that works for ourselves and how to one of the things you talk about, one of the tips in your book is like sit in the airport and watch the people walking by, and you can categorize them into these different archetypes.
Yeah, we're all psychics. I think it's interesting, like from a young age, like the idea of being an empath or psychic or intuitive or any of those words are kind of poo-pooed on as being too woo-woo or out there or meta. And I think within that, it kind of reduces our power to be able to connect with each other at more intimate, invisible ways,
Right.
And so we live in a very material world. And if it's not like measurable in a beaker and we can't touch it and feel it and pick it up, and we're like, oh, I'm not interested in it. But I think some of those invisible aspects that we kind of put down are just like subtly reading somebody's body language. I sometimes question how much of my like if I get like an intuitive download or whatever, how much of that is just gathering bits of information through people's visual cues.
Yeah.
So that's like in the book, I mentioned Albert Morabian, and is like a professor at UCLA. It was in the 70s. They came up with the 55-38-7 principle, and essentially breaks down that 55% of our communication comes via body language, and then 38% is the tonality of our voice, and then 7% is the actual words that we're using. And that's specifically when there's conflict. So if I say something to you now, but my hips start facing the door, or I start maybe squinting, or my voice starts changing, or any of that, you're like, okay, like you totally divert away from my words, and you're just watching my organism produce communication to you, and you're more watching me at this visible perspective. And that's what we're always doing, so I think sometimes our intuitive hits, I just question, I'm like, I think maybe I'm just like subconsciously gathering visual information from somebody, but then we usually shut those down because we're kind of taught not to anyway. But then I think that I'm curious with you, Jade, like what about the invisible stuff?
What do you mean?
Yeah, like the stuff that plays out, like are you saying like when you're able to see chakras and like animal,
or
like
all that stuff? It's like, because there's the body language part, that subconsciously we're gathering information from each other, but perhaps there's other
because what I see is
levels.
Colors.
I don't
like
see
colors around people, and if it's like a very low functioning, it's like gray or brown. But I remember when I was a kid seeing those colors and seeing like little bright lights. My son tells me he sees them now. So but I do agree with you. I think that we, as a kid, we're discredited. We're told it's our imagination, or like if it's a religious household, we're told that we're kind of taught that it's like a dark thing not to mess with. And so I think we all are born this way. We're all born intuitive, whether it's picking up on what you pick up or something else. And we just turn it off. And if we can learn to turn it back on through whatever, plant medicine, through deep meditation, whatever your tool is, then, or through like with you. Yeah.
Oh, go on.
With you, like you fine tune yours, but go ahead, Mercedes.
I was just going to add that I think that in our culture, and probably every culture, because like what you were saying, Erin, when things become woo-woo, it's something out of reach, and suddenly that's scary to us. And so we put it aside or we just push it away. But of course, the way that then we create these stereotypes around it, we cheapen it and we make it into this thing that you're going to get ripped off by, you know, the palm reader or the psychic who's just a fake and trying to get your money because it's something invisible, that it's not tangible, you know, the value that they might be able to give you. Not that all palm readers and psychics are, you know, quality people and they're going to not rip you off. But I think that when we can open up to possibilities, there's always something to be learned. So
I think different people have different forms of voyances, you know, and so you may be clairvoyant, or you maybe maybe you hear sounds, or maybe you see colors, or maybe you know, there's different things. So like I oftentimes hear words, you know, so I'll hear sentences. Essentially it sounds like, literally it's like someone, like a voice talking. It's not like it's like an old man. It's like, it's just kind of more, it's just more like I get a sense of like, you know, go over there, meet that person, you know.
So
and
it's like your inner knowing, or is it like something outside of your body, like a deity?
No, it's like in there. It's not a, it's not like a specific, you know,
not like Paul Selig.
It's not a Paul Selig thing.
Yeah. Okay.
No, which I think the Greeks called that your daemon, your inner daemon. And then it got misconstrued into being like, oh, it's a demon thing. So if you're hearing, you know, but throughout various cultures around the world, having some type of voice kind of saying like, do your laundry or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, right. My inner daemon's like communicating like my inner intuition. But because we live in such a materialistic world, anything that's not right here, like right, you know, you can see it, feel it right in front of you. It's not to be trusted. But I think if you start to give some more space, more spaciousness to some of those, like those voices, they might have interesting things to say. We're getting bombarded by voices all the time anyway. It's just usually your cell phone or your TV. Like the voices are everywhere, you know. So if you move some of that out of the way, all of a sudden there's a little bit more spaciousness for some of your own internal voice to speak up. I think
it's important too. Just I feel everyone listening is like, is this guy schizophrenic? Are these people just okay and open with that?
No. Shut the podcast down.
I mean, no, not to even shit on schizophrenic people. But the thing is, I was talking with Eric Gotzi on his show the other day, literally about the fact that I probably tend towards the more schizophrenic side of things. Maybe genetically that also runs in my family. So maybe that's why I'm prone that direction, but just because of the fact of having vivid dreams. So I have like extremely vivid dreams where I almost can't tell the difference between dream life and reality life. And so we had this conversation about if schizophrenia or being further on that side of the spectrum, if there's like, you know, a spectrum, yes, having the tendency to be able to hear that inner knowing or see something so vividly, like dreams for me are almost like a ceremony, you know, like where I have all this therapy that happens in there if I can capture it and journal it and all those things. That's my subconscious being allowed to come up and me being able to consciously then see it and capture it. So I'm just bringing that up to say to anyone listening, like not to be afraid of when you feel a little like, is everybody else, you know, having these same visions, or hearing the same kind of guiding voice, because it's all part of you, you know?
Yeah, and if
you do something dark.
If you're too confident that you know what's going on, you just haven't observed closely enough. Like we only see a perception of the visual spectrum, and we only hear a small fraction of the acoustic spectrum. And you know, when your eyes are looking forward, there's like this blank space in the middle that your mind just kind of creates and fills in that space for you. And when images go into your eyes, you have to flip it back upside down, and it goes through this whole extrapolation process for you to, like, you know, so your interpretation of what's going on is based off of the filter that you perceive the world through. Different for everybody, and that's, you know, that's okay. That's okay.
We're gonna dig deeper on all that, because you wrote half your book on senses, and I think that's so incredible. I wanted to bring us back to this question about what brought you to this work. So like from what's the youngest age that you remember really wanting to even move towards building your body up or figuring out what physiology was all about?
Well, so in the introduction of the book, I mentioned my dad ended up going to jail for like crack, and he was like pimping women and all sorts of interesting stuff. Before that, he was like a stockbroker and president of the Nature Conservancy. And then he got like possessed by drugs, or I don't know, possessed by something. And he was essentially like, life was hanging on by this tiniest of threads. And it was a very fascinating experience to be in, at home with him and like watching, he was like, had multiple personalities as well, which was very interesting during that time. And because he was just strung out. It was like, it wasn't like him anymore.
Right.
It was full on possession. It's very fascinating. And now he's doing quite well. And he's in love with a girl, which is very exciting, or a woman. And he's like getting a place in Florida. It's very good. But at the time, I think that created a sensation of like unsafe home environment. And so what I noticed was a packing on, in retrospect, I packed on muscle to kind of like protect my biological home. And then I was, working as a personal trainer and teaching people how to pack muscles on their biological homes. And I think in large part, probably just, transposing my imbalances onto other people and getting them more muscles. But then eventually my own body started kind of falling apart. So it like shoulder dislocations and just like pain and all sorts of things. And then that led into studying body work and Rolfing and different forms of like healing arts, just for the sake of it was necessary, or else I was going to explode.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting story. And I know you'll dive deep with us on basically anything. So I'm just trying to stay focused because it's hard.
No worries.
You're one of my favorite people to
talk
listen
about
to.
God.
So I want to dive into your information about posture and postural archetypes, which you lay out in your book beautifully. So something you say in your book is, in the last 16 years working with clients, I've yet to meet a person whose physical patterns did not relate to their history and personality, or his overall muscular tone did not match their temperament. I find this so fascinating. So how does that all work?
Well, all sorts of ways. So one, just tangibly, you can think right now, like imagine you are stressed out. Imagine you get scared suddenly. Like you'll literally, in order for that to happen, your shoulders will raise up, your breath will shorten. It will go up more into like your clavicular, like upper chest area. You might squint, you might contract your hand. Like in order, I refer to James Blake in the book as well, which is considered like he's really important person in history in this whole conversation. And he talks about it's very challenging for us to have an emotion without having an embodied experience with that. So if you separate the embodied aspect of feeling angry or feeling sad or feeling any of those things, it just kind of has this like pale kind of blah sensation. But then when you can actualize that physical embodied aspect of the emotion, then you can actually really truly feel it. And he argues that perhaps the movement comes before the emotion. And I just think it's interesting, because we just assume that this emotion, like where does the emotion live exactly and how does it actualize?
Yeah.
But what you'll notice is when someone acts out an emotion, it kind of stirs it up, and eventually they can move it all the way through to get to the end of it. But I'm still questioning. I think it goes from both ways. Do we move ourselves into an emotion, or does the emotion, is it this floating thing that exists within us? I don't know. I don't have an answer for it, but I think it's an interesting thing because I don't think people think of emotions being acted out physically and embodied so much.
Yeah. And the whole like theme of our event with you in March was motion before emotion, like getting, movement and dancing so that you can shake off all of those other feelings.
Shake it off.
Yeah.
And you'll see, so there's when people have tension, particularly around the cranial nerves, which are innervating muscles like the trapezius and sternocleidomastoid and some of the facial muscles, when those muscles are tense, that will actually end up sending a signal through your autonomic nervous system to go into more of a fight, flight, sympathetic kind of state. And so a little simple tool or tip that people can play with is, if you are feeling stressed out, you could go through some eye exercises and start opening up the eyes, start looking up at the ceiling, maybe get like a little shoulder massage, maybe even just like hold some weights and kind of allow those shoulders to drop down, shrug those shoulders out a little bit, maybe jump around and kind of move some of that energy out. And as you start to, that's why we feel so good after we get a massage. You're starting to kind of disengage some of those triggers that are tied into your autonomic nervous system to tell you that you're freaking out. So you can go in, this kind of goes both ways. You can go in manually, touch the body, and create change in the tonicity of the muscles, which tells your organism that you feel safe and calm and rested. Or some type of peripheral experience can happen. You can feel loved by someone, you can get a raise, you can, feel safe in your life. And then all of a sudden that will spill back in and cause the tonicity of your body to change. Because in order for you to experience something, truly experience something, it has to be an embodied experience.
Right.
So it says,
I wonder sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, it's a lot of this is theoretical. I mean, a lot of this is it's a conversation. It's not.
Well, I wonder if it's like, of course, it's partly what they see in the mirror, but I wonder if has something to do with why some people get addicted to Botox is because then they're not making.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what came to my mind.
Speak on it.
Well, that's beautiful. So that's in the book too. We talk about Botox.
Oh.
So when you do get Botox, it will cause a short-term sensation of feeling a little bit happier. Because it's tying back to those same nerves in the face. So if you had like more of like a resting bitch face kind of thing, which literally makes you more pissed off at the world. There's other research that we included in the book on people where they put golf tees in between the brows, which caused them to kind of go into more of that like bitch face type look. And sure enough, all of a sudden they start perceiving, people as being annoying, and they're kind of just have more of like a temperament of being more angry because they shape their face to that.
Yeah.
But with Botox, it does the inverse. So it's a neurotoxin that causes all those tissues to kind of open up, and then it paralyzes them from being able to go into that resting bitch face, which induces a sensation of, or appearance / sensation, because they're the same thing, of feeling a little bit happier and eyes kind of opened up.
Yeah.
But that can screw up the whole system of actually having an organic, true, yeah. So a couple things. One, it can mess up your potential to have a more natural smile. So it's called, in the book, talked about this as well. The Duchenne smile is what it's called when you're smiling with your eyes, or smizing.
That's my favorite smile.
Yeah, well, that's your favorite smile because you're like an organic human being that appreciates authenticity. Yeah. And so when someone smiles with their eyes and their mouth and their whole face lights up, in order for their face to light up, it can't be infused with a bunch of neurotoxin that paralyzes it. There's nothing for or against Botox. My opinion is kind of.
Well, we're not promoting it.
I'm neutral on it. I'm just like, it seems like not overly natural.
It's toxins.
I'm still neutral.
Yeah. I'm sure women don't want to be getting Botox, but there's a whole nother conversation around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I stand to the side. I'm just like, find the research interesting. That's all. So it's an interesting conversation. It's just fun to think about.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much in there too. And you've broken down these different archetypes as far as posture goes that you can kind of pinpoint a person just by looking at them, or just by the way that they stand in front of you or walk a certain way. So can you maybe just breeze through a couple of those?
Yeah, for sure. So the version that you guys, the galley copy of the book, you don't see the images, which is a little bit bummer, but you'll see it in the final version. So I had an artist create actual like graphics of what these people look like, and it has like shapes and swirls and different stuff to kind of show the emotion the person is experiencing. But essentially I break it down for simplicity down into 5 postural archetypes that most people will kind of fall somewhere in between, but they'll lean toward one more than others typically. And the first one that's really common in our culture is, I call it the mopey archetype. And essentially it's like your kind of head's pulled forward and like forward head posture, shoulders are rolled forward, maybe a little bit of that like hunchback hyperkyphotic spine thing, just like the literal definition of depression to be pulled down. It looks as though they're kind of being pulled down.
So I'm sitting up straighter as you talk about
a lot of alcoholics have that.
Well, it sounds to me like someone on a cell phone.
Exactly, that too. Well, it's similar patterns, and so posturally, when a person is in that hunched over position, throughout millennia, that would be a pattern that you would practice if you were in defense, if you were afraid, if you were, one of those types of situations. If you were to go upright more and kind of lengthen out your neck and your organs and all that stuff, it would potentially be a pretty vulnerable position to put yourself.
I think of it as protecting your heart, because you're like hunching over to like keep your heart safe. It's like they don't feel like their heart is safe, so they're like that, and then you're open and you're, like you said, vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. So depression is the number 1 leading cause of disability in one word, which is pretty fascinating. I would say without a doubt that there's a mechanical conversation there that's rarely had. And my intention of the book is to be a foundation for that conversation. Be like, haha, like here, we put all the research. It's like, it's right there. So that's one of the archetypes is mopey. And then I won't go through all of them, but anxious is another example of an archetypal pattern that you'll see with some people, where they might talk really fast and their shoulders are kind of up and their eyes are wide open. And some people literally walk around on their tippy toes. Have you ever met somebody like that
No.
before? Or like kids do it sometimes.
I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, hi, walk around your tippy toes. Interesting. So they don't feel very grounded. So they walk around. It's just like, okay, like you're walking on eggshells through your life.
Literally. Their muscles are swole, though.
Yeah, they're all, it's another archetype. So
swole,
swole. So so swole is an archetype, which is where I came from, packing on muscle as a means of showing the world that you're strong enough and good enough and generally enough, I think. And then, anyways, there's
I believe I fit into bendy. Yeah.
You would be more bendy, correct?
Yeah,
bendy,
and it's
bendy aligned.
Even the way that you described the type of exercises that I would be more drawn to because they're easy for me or they're fun for me or whatever, it feels normal for my body to do, like yoga, bendy things, obviously things that allow me to express that, but I need to be doing the opposite. And I totally know that because my hormones even say, these are where you need to be focusing more on lifting weights and doing the opposite things that a bendy person doesn't want to do. Yeah. So that was my next kind of little point I wanted to bring up with you is how does our posture influence our hormones? Because this is so cool.
Yeah. Well, so this is debatable, which is the in the galley copy, I go back in deeper and kind of mention other research that's potentially refutes. And then there's like counter rebuttal research, so the Amy Cuddy research out of Harvard was the primary research that was demonstrating that your postural patterns affect testosterone levels and cortisol. So essentially what that was when you're in a hunched over position for a couple minutes, they do saliva samples and they found that being in that position would actually decrease testosterone levels and increase stress hormones. And then the inverse would happen the other direction. It's still a little bit on the it's hard to say that that's 100% exactly what happens because replicating research can sometimes be challenging. And in this case, this is something where there's been argument going back and forth with it. But what's not for debate is that it affects the way that people think and the way that they feel. And then I would trickle that back into, well, if it affects the way you think and you feel, it affects your hormones and all of that internal stuff. But yeah, that is technically up for debate still, whether it actually directly does affect hormone levels. So I want to have that caveat.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've spent so much of my life like on stage. You as ring girls, Jade and I can both probably agree on this. So you stand on stage in this like kind of superhero position, essentially, for a certain amount of time. And by the way, it's the swole position too. So I'm not doing it in the proper way, I'm sure, because my back always hurts. Right. As a woman, you have to make a curve with your body. So you have to put your weight on one side and kind of alternate it. There's this whole thing that goes on, but I definitely can feel different. I feel different after it. A lot of times I feel more anxious, but that's probably because I'm on stage in front of a bunch of people. But I think there is something to putting your shoulders back, even just in the way that people respond to you because of it.
Oh yeah. And so there's other research that was done in San Francisco University that they took two different groups of students. In the one group, they had go into that same position and then access different memories, so what they found was it was easier for students to access more depressive memories when they were in a hunched over mopey position. And it was easier for people to access more feel good, positive in quotations, whatever that word means. It's a kind of, it's a relative word, but like happy times in their life when they're in more of this upright, aligned, stacked position. Yeah. And because you're always anchoring yourself to certain postural patterns. You're anchoring is a linguistic programming term, NLP term. So you could anchor yourself, for example, to a song, for an easy example of that. So every time before you go out to play the sport that you play this one particular song and it gets you psyched up and it anchors you in that state of like, hell yeah, like go get them, I'm feeling good. Well, the same thing happens every time you put your body in a certain position. So if every time you go into that upright, like arms overhead, like woohoo, we did it. We've been anchoring that for, literally millions of years, that when me and all of my ancestors, probably since I was like a little single cell organism, I'm sure single cell organisms would contract in fearful, dangerous times and then, open up when it feels
Right.
safe and warm, and I'll take the sun in. Like I want to bring it in. Whatever's out there, I want to bring it in. So we've been anchoring certain postural positions into our lives since we were little babies.
Right.
So when you go into a hunched over protected position, you've anchored that in as protect, fight, flight, maybe freeze. When you go into this upright, stacked, comfortable position, you that into, I feel safe. I feel loved. I feel connected. I'm a part of my community. Bring it in. Whatever's out there, bring it in.
Interesting.
I love that.
So just as kind of like, I'm going to ask this question for myself because it's interesting to me. I don't know if anyone else is going to be on board because I'm probably the only person in the world that doesn't drink caffeine. But you talk a lot, you limit. Yeah. So you've mentioned that caffeine is like one of those things that we're kind of using as a Band-Aid maybe to not listen to our bodies in the moment and not be aware that we need to maybe sleep or eat or whatever it is that we need to do to gain more energy. Do you think that is an epidemic? Do you think it's like worth worrying about it all?
Caffeine particularly?
Yeah, like the amount of caffeine that we choose to consume on a daily basis as a culture.
I mean, I think there's like a few things there. One, we're, typically pretty underslept. And then there's a whole bunch of, this gets into like so many different conversations. One, I think light is one of the biggest elephants in the room of the sleep conversation, that ever since, I think it was like 1879, I'm not sure, but the origination of the light bulb going public and being sold, being put into homes, that was the first time in history that the sunset wasn't lights out, and so once we start to add those artificial suns into our houses after the sun goes down, it tells your circadian cycles that, okay, cool, the sun's still up, it's time to keep going. And then you pull your phone out before you go to bed and you're getting that same juice from the LED lights that are essentially just like a direct blue light supplement, which is telling your physiology you need to wake up and get up and at them right before you go to bed. So just because a person's body falls asleep doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting the deepest levels of sleep that they could, and then there's a whole slew of other connections beyond that. But I think also culturally we have more of an affinity towards being up and being extroverted and, really like being out there. And I think
busy.
Being busy. Yeah, exactly. If you look down at your calendar and it's not like filled from now for the next 2 weeks, it means you're like
feel a sense of worth
or something, right?
Right.
It could just mean that you're in control of your life and you value free time and you value spontaneity. That's potentially what that could mean as well. I think typically with most things, it's like somewhere in the middle. So I think that's another thing. Like we don't see in the cover of Muscle and Fitness or Men's or Women's Health, we don't see too often people like laying on a foam roller or like meditating or taking a walk in the woods or introspecting or writing in their journal or sleeping really well. We just don't get that. We get like Rambo, shredded, shirt. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a little bit of like a missing link culturally where we just don't praise yin, femininity, nurturing, listening. We praise more the opposite, more like yang, get out there, bark orders, get it done. But realistically, there's no yin without yang. There's no black without white. Like all of those, they just are one and the same, and they balance each other. And then the media kind of chooses for us, or maybe we influence the media because again, it's all connected, it's all the same thing. But it kind of sways the minds of people of like, okay, this is what's cool right now. But perhaps maybe it's happening right now. There might be a swing in another direction where all of a sudden, maybe for a span of 100 years or 50 years or whatever, the really cool thing will be to meditate and to listen and to have chimes at your house. I don't know.
Yeah, it is getting.
I think all of us here in this show right now are
we're doing it.
Yeah,
sponsoring that.
Yeah,
we're so shaped by media. There's like the Marshall McLuhan book, The Medium is the Massage. So his like phrase was the medium is the message, and the book is called Medium is the Massage. There's like a story behind it, but so we are always being shaped by these computers that we're on right now, our cell phones, books, our education system. So when you're going to school, you think you're teaching your kids or being, yourself being taught about, algebra and history and poetry and whatnot. The bigger impact on you at a mental, emotional, physical level is literally the medium that you're actually receiving that information through. So when you go to school, you're, for the sake of like a movement conversation, you think you're sitting on a bus and you're kind of hunching over, and now you're staring at your phone while you do that, and then you got your backpack on. It's kind of asymmetrical. You walk up to the door, and then you go and you sit in place for all of the day. And then the teachers are telling you that you need to sit in place. And if you don't do that, then you have some type of learning disability. Now you need to get medicated. And there's a lot of positive things as well about the school system. But it's just interesting. I think we get so wrapped up in the minutia of the details of the information we're putting in, and we miss out on the actual shaping mechanism of the medium that we put our organisms into. We become our environment. It gets weird.
Do people straighten up their backs whenever you walk in the room?
I'm hunched over right now as I'm talking.
I think all three of us are sitting on the floor, right?
I'm on the floor for sure.
So are we.
So I appreciate it.
Well, we do it every time. It wasn't for you.
Well, you guys are healthy people. So it's not you. There should be no reason to be kind of trapped in an aligned position or trapped in an upright position. That's just one of the flavors. Like mopey is great. Anxious is great. Like all of those are just different expressions.
Right.
So it's like, think if you're like painting on a canvas, you'd for the most part, say if you're a part of the people that are kind of, say you're part of the people that are on disability for depression. Okay. That person very likely paints more from a postural color of like black, gray, kind of like down colors, right? Whereas somebody else, maybe like you guys, might paint more from like, if you're a bendy archetype, you're like more blues and purples and like hills and pizzazz. Like you just want to bring
my background.
Yeah, right, bingo. But really it's just, it takes all the colors to make this beautiful painting that we're all living in. And every person can access blacks and browns and purples and yellows. So each of those postural patterns, there's no wrong or right. But if you do have the basic mechanics of what all these positions kind of represent, you can kind of start to take control of the way that your body and mind and emotions and everything develop themselves.
Beautiful. So speaking of basic mechanics, your book boasts 5 principles or 5 daily movements that we can all incorporate in order to align our lives. So can we give us some nuggets from the book?
For sure. Well, so the first thing is just spend at least 30 minutes a day on the ground in whatever capacity that is. So that could be take a yoga class, and that would be, you've already done, over an hour of floor time essentially at that point, but every time you're checking your mail, like email, put your computer on a low coffee table or on the ground, or even better, go outside in the grass, near Wi-Fi or whatever, and just get yourself all the way down. One, it's better for circulation. You're moving lymphatic fluid, which needs muscular contraction in order to circulate, so that's great. As well, you're taking your joints through a full range of motion. So your ankles are going through that range of motion, your knees, your hips, you're moving those pelvic floor muscles, so the adult diaper industry is slowly exceeding that of the baby diaper industry.
I feel like yoni eggs are becoming a trend now. So
yoni eggs, right? Yeah, exactly. But so even better than a yoni egg would just be taking your body through full functional ranges of motion throughout your whole life.
Yeah.
So if you're continually lunging and squatting and picking up buckets of water or whatever, like we've done, like your yoni naturally goes through all of those, those contractile phases. But if you pull all that out, then all of a sudden we need to add these movement supplements back into our system. So the same way at one point your body could eat, full functional whole foods and like supplement, what the hell are you? I don't even know what that means. It's the same thing we've done now with movement. So because our food lacks, soil's lacking magnesium or, whatever the thing is, okay, well, buy a magnesium supplement. It's like our movement's lacking squatting. Okay, buy a ab or like a adductor thrust machine thing. It's like, no, dude.
So just do the work. Yeah.
Do the thing. Like get a freaking yoga mat, put it in your living room, and spend a little bit of time just laying on it. And every time you get up from the ground, you take your body through a full range of motion. So that's one of them. The really valuable thing with that gets me is thinking about my parents, and thinking of them falling and not being able to get up off of the ground. You know, so when I make it personal like that, it almost like chokes me up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy shit, like that's a preventable thing. Like I'm like, mom, dad, get on the ground right now. Like you get on the ground right now because you can, you know? And so the longer that you go without doing that, the greater the chasm, that distance between your hips and the floor get. And eventually you can't make that jump. Once you can't make that jump, then you're a fall risk. And now you lose your physical autonomy. And now you're essentially kind of like, you know, your function in the tribe is kind of, you're at a tough spot. You know, so if we were hunter-gatherer tribes or walking from place to place, and all of a sudden one of the people literally can't get up and down off of the ground anymore, it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll take care of you now. You know, so I would suggest while we have that capacity to move our hips all the way up and down off of the ground, you just keep doing that every day and then you won't lose it.
Right.
There's no like, oh, I'm 65, my hips stop work. Like that's not a thing. Like we move ourselves into these positions. And then because our system, I think like the allopathic model of medicine in general, we kind of seek treatments outside of ourselves in order to fix something from within. And then we start to disbelieve people that might do more internal work.
Right.
So now we're always looking for this external thing. So if I didn't buy it on an infomercial, if it didn't come from a doctor's office, I don't trust it. You know, but underneath that, like we have, the human body is so flippin' smart. Like it has all the tools that it needs to heal itself.
Yeah.
And nature has all of the medicine that we need. As we start to pull ourselves away from that natural movement and pull ourselves out of nature, that's when things get really weird. And yeah, we start becoming dependent on technology.
Yeah. So what are the other principles?
Hang, you got to hang every day.
Hang. Yes. That's a you thing. 100. I think that's you're the first person I heard that from. And that's been
good. I love that. Yeah. So yeah, hang. Sorry, I've been recording the audiobook all day. So I'm wearing compression socks. That's another tip. I'm taking them off right now because my feet are losing circulation. So hanging, there's a whole book by a guy called Dr. John Kirsch called Shoulder Pain ? And in that, he's an orthopedic surgeon that was working with patients that would come in potentially for shoulder surgery. And what he found was that taking people through just a really simple hanging protocol, it was just a minute and a half. I believe his was a minute and a half. Mine's a minute and a half. I recommend it. I think his was a minute and a half as well.
When you say hang, you mean from like those acrobatic-like things?
No. Literally hang from your hands. Grab a tree branch, a pull-up bar, or in between your office door. You know, so every time you walk through that door, I got my socks off. I'm better now. So every time you walk through that door, you just go through with this little decompressive hang that literally reshapes the structure of your potentially rolled forward shoulders.
Okay.
It decompresses your spine. It opens up the ribs and all that intercostal space. So it opens up more space for breath. Just that. And it also activates the hand muscles, which there's other research that's in the book about that. This is pretty common. I think people might have heard of this, but your hand grip being closely associated to cardiovascular health. So that doesn't mean that people should go out and just get like hand thermometer squeezer things. What it means is that they should pick some shit up, you know, do manual labor, pull yourself up a ladder, grab a tree branch and hang, kind of swing yourself around through it for a little bit. People that have stronger grips because they're using their hands to do things like that end up having significantly less incidence of cardiovascular disease.
So there's even dudes got it down.
Oh yeah, jiu-jitsu is moving all the fluids. And it's also you're getting touch. So there's a whole chapter in the book about touch. You know, and it's also synchronizing your movement to another person. You know, capoeira would be an even more enriching experience in a lot of ways, because now all of a sudden you're tying in music. You're tying also in community.
I love watching that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're literally watching like a little medicine bucket. You know, people are circling up, cheering for each other, singing to each other, harmonizing, tuning their nervous systems, and also attuning their facial positions to each other. You know, so if you're around a bunch of happy people, you can't help but feel happy. If you go in and you're feeling like, oh man, screw this place, but everybody else is like laughing and smiling. That's what happens at music festivals. You know, a lot of people go in that are like a Burning Man now. I'm not a Burning Man kind of, I'm not into it or whatever. And then they get there, and because naturally we adapt and attune to to each other.
Right.
That's what we do. We can become a hive. You put that person that's like not a festival person around enough happy, loving people. Maybe a girl takes her shirt off or something and somebody else like gives them, whatever they give them. They're like, well, I think I like this place, man.
Mercedes and I go to a documentary film festival.
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, well, it's the same effect.
That's Mountain Film Festival for my
it's the same effect. You're surrounded by beautiful mountains, beautiful nature, but you're also surrounded by people who like, they're there because they give a damn about all these issues. And
they're all smiling, like the biggest fucking smiles you could ever.
Yeah.
They're very indomitable spirits. And it's
it's one of the best things. If you're like a person that's like, what can I do for the world? Like fucking smile. Like on the street.
With your eyes.
Do shit and smile.
Yeah.
Do shit and smile. Hang. You're good.
Yeah, you're good.
I love that.
Well, I want people to buy your book so we can save the others.
The other get it all out. Don't worry about listening to the book. Just listen to this episode.
This is the audiobook. So we'll save the other 3 so that people will buy it. But speaking of all that, how do our senses, sight, sound, and touch, play a critical role in our well-being? And what are some ways we can hone them to give ourselves that physical and mental edge?
Well, I mean, we've kind of been talking about it the whole time, of how our senses, everything. But so the typical model of many people's fitness or mine for a long time was more the way that I get strong or fast or lean is through lifting weights and sprinting and doing all these things. And very rarely do we think about, how does the sounds in my environment affect my rest practice or even my getting up practice. Like we think of, if you listen to that song that psychs you up, that's a sound that's literally turning your physiological wheels to say, whoa, I feel good. So in your home, it's a really valuable tool to just go back and do like a little audit of what are the sounds like in my environment. So do I have like a constant like ringing noise in the background, or do I have like, maybe I live near traffic? Maybe it might be wise for like the long-term health of my family and my own health to pull my home a little bit back away, so I don't constantly have people beeping and stuff like that in the background. Because all
get a
that,
waterfall. That's what I did because of the
traffic. Yeah, right. That's the other thing is then maybe you can get a white noisemaker.
Yeah.
Get like a little water burbler thing, which is I recommend that in the book. So there's other things that you can do. All I'm suggesting is do an audit of your soundscape in your life, because it literally is tuning your physiology. So then there's also your filter on sound has an impact as well. So your filter on anything has an impact. So if I perceive, like an example would be like if there's like construction happening, it's like, oh, that damn construction, I can't take it, it's free, I can't concentrate. But if that construction is building, the house for your family, or you're building a community or something like that, and you're going to make lots of money from it because you're the developer of the community, you're like, ooh, that sweet sound of construction. So there's also a filter thing, which means that perhaps we can step back beyond some of this and become more powerful than the sounds around us if we can change our filter. But that's kind of just like a thought. So sound is one thing to play with. Sight is the other thing that's hugely impactful, because we're chronically myopically focused at typically phones or computers in front of us. When we put our vision into that more narrow perspective, it literally puts our physiology into more of like this like executive function go type position. So more sympathetic fight flight, like get her done. When you look into the panorama and you allow your ciliary muscles and all the muscles of your eye to relax, because it doesn't need to bend that light in order for you to see the picture. It's a muscular relaxation that's tied into your autonomic nervous system that tells you that it's time to chill and take in the whole. So when you are looking out into the distance and taking it all in, that literally starts to tune the way that you think and the way that you feel. Okay. So if you're stressed out, the wrong decision is to look at your Instagram notification. Right. And that's typically what most of us do. Like that's what I do quite often. I'll get home and be like, oh, it's like, I guess I'll check out my notification.
How they zone out.
Yeah.
And so what that's doing though is it's exasperating that same kind of stress pattern that I was having before.
So look out at a beautiful view, or just anything that's long distance, really, to get some sort of depth.
Yeah, put your
that'll
workstation
relax
near a
your
window.
eyes.
Yeah, put your workstation near a window.
Relax your tongue, relax your eyes. These are two of the best tips I think we've ever heard on this show.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. Relax the tongue. It's all the same thing. You know, if you collapse at any level, you collapse at every level. If you contract at any level, that sends a signal through the rest of your physiology that tighten up. You know, and that, as I mentioned, that also sends a signal out beyond your own skin body and sends a signal to your kids, sends a signal to your partner. You know, so I think it's always very interesting if you're feeling some way about somebody else, there's a good chance that you're creating it. And so it's just like always like checking in. I'm like, am I creating this? Like, what is this? Because we're always tuning to each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes humans be able to do what humans have done, is our ability to continually adapt and communicate and essentially create a hive. Like that's what we're doing. And that's what cell phone is an expression of. That's what internet is an expression of. We're becoming one organism on Earth.
It's really good.
Sound, I've been noticing, is really, maybe because we do so much with the podcast, but I don't know if it's just now that I'm noticing it because of the work we're doing and I'm looking at this more closely, or it's always been the case for me. But like in an intimate setting, like even a sexual setting, I notice that sound is extremely important to me. Like the sound of my lover's voice. It doesn't even have to be a matter of what he's saying. It doesn't even have to be the voice. It could be the sound of breathing and all those things that are going on in there. But I'm like hyper aware of it now, where I don't remember always being that way. Do you think that our senses can kind of change them for different reasons? We change
I
the
think
ability?
you're probably more likely just becoming a more sensitive person, and you're just happen to maybe, you know, but sound,
Probably a good call.
I think, I don't know. I think it's probably something that subconsciously you've always been pretty sensitive to, but you're becoming more sensitive in general. And you're noticing how perhaps as far as like the voyance is, perhaps sound is like a part of like one of like the special ones that you're more keen to than maybe some other people. And you're starting to develop that. But that's the thing, is like you're always exercising. So when you are looking at your phone, you're training your eyes to be myopically focused. And eventually they'll be so good at that, perhaps they'll be mutated into that position.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You know, so if you start to intentionally listen, you're literally starting to train all of those neurological synaptic connections and the little muscles and such in your ear. Like you're literally starting to activate and engage those systems, which causes them to become more robust.
Aaron, this is blowing my mind.
But your attention, it's all about your attention.
Right.
You know,
but
so
think about, we started a podcast a year ago, which is all about listening.
Yep. And now all of a sudden you're noticing sound in a deeper way. Yeah, of course. It would be weird if that wasn't the case.
No, it kind of would. And I've also just been, you know, through this process as well, been wanting to call empathy and softness into my life. So I feel like it's all kind of involved there, but definitely just the fact, like I've told myself every day for the last year, listen, you know, instead of talk.